Hi guys, it's Penguin Design here to bring you a tutorial on how to make a 2D game, specifically the classic 80s Pong. So this tutorial will be focused on the very basics of Unity, such as basic scripting in C# and getting around the GUI in Unity. We'll also be using third-party programs such as Photoshop to create the sprites. So if you don't have access to Photoshop, there's many free alternatives. The most popular of these is GIMP. I'll provide a link in the description for a free download for this. I'm personally going to use Photoshop because I find it's easier to use, but it's up to complete personal preference, and I promise that everything I'll be doing in this video you can do in GIMP. So what I'm going to do is File and then create a new document, and I'll call this paddle. So this will be the image sprite for the little paddle that the ball bounces off. So preferably you're going to use square numbers, perfect squares. Computers personally like these, so these generally are multiples of 2 as well. So the computer likes 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. So what I'm going to do is set its height to 128. Or actually let's make it 64 and its width to 16. So don't worry, if for some reason we find that this is not tall enough or too short, we can always change its properties in Unity. So what you're going to do is click over here on your color picker and drag it all the way up to white. And then you're going to press G on your keyboard, and this will bring up the fill tool. And in case it's bringing up the gradient tool, click on this part of the toolbar and click paint bucket tool. So just click in the middle of your selection and then you're done. So we're going to save this as, and you can save it wherever you want, but the main thing is that you save it out as a PNG. So I already have one, so yep, I don't mind replacing it. Okay, so now we're going to create the ball. So I might say I'll call this ball, and I might make its height as well 16, as well as its width 16. This can always be changed, and it should save our previous tool settings, so all we have to do is click. Again, we'll hit File, Save As, and make sure to select PNG from the list. Boom, and we're pretty much done in Photoshop. So no, we don't have to save the changes because we've already exported a PNG. So what I'm going to do now is open up a program known as Unity. So if you don't already have this on your computer, it's the game engine that we're going to be using to put together the code for our game. So you can find it at unity3d.com, and currently Unity 5 is available for free. So all you have to do is click up here on Get Unity, and then you can get the free download. So that's pretty impressive. So all of this can be done completely for free. So what I'm going to do is open up Unity. And as you can see, I've already tried this a few times, but I'm going to try again. So I'm going to hit New Project, and you can name this whatever you want. I'm going to call it Pong YouTube, okay? You can choose your save location, but I'm fine with that. And set up its default for 2D. So now just hit Create Project. So now you'll be presented with Unity, and what we're going to do is make some changes to the layout. So the most important windows here are your scene and game view. So I like to have them both showing at once, so what I'm going to do is click on my game view and drag it over until it comes up in a separate window. So now what I can do is edit in my scene view and then see everything that's happening in my game view. So in order to move around in the scene view, press Alt and then click, left click, and this will let you pan around. So this is the most important thing for 2D. And as you would expect, scroll lets you zoom in and out. So that's basically the most important controls for 2D. So in the hierarchy, Unity will show everything that's in your scene, and to begin with, all you'll have is a main camera. So this is the object that's in charge of all the rendering. So what I'm going to do is set its background color to a black, like the original. But before we do that, we're going to go up to Edit, Project Settings, Player, and now we want to select Web, because we're going to export this for the internet. And under Resolution and Presentation, over here you can change the screen width and height of your game. So I'm going to make it 1080p, so the width would be 100 1920, and its height would be 180. But you can make this whatever you want, preferably larger, because else your game can become pixelated. So if you want to, you can name your company, but that's fine for me. And that's pretty much all the stuff we have to set up for default. So to get a more realistic view of what our final game will look like, here where it says free aspect, change it to 16 by 9. So this will show what our final game will be exported like. Okay, so what we're going to do is in our project window, that should be down here, if you right click, you'll be presented with a whole list of options, and under create you'll have even more options. So we're just going to click on the first option, which is a folder. So this lets you organize all your assets like you would imagine. So I'm going to call this sprites. So sprites is the term for 2D images. And yeah, so in my sprites folder, I'm now going to right click inside of it and then hit import new asset. So this will present a file explorer, or depending on whatever your OS is, it will enable you though to navigate to where you just saved those Photoshop files. So I'm going to navigate to them. I'm going to open up paddle. I'm going to repeat that process and now open up ball. So now you should see a white square and a white rectangle. So what you're going to do is select the ball and then shift and click on the paddle. And so now whenever we make changes over here, it will affect both of them. So pixels to units, personally I like to use 16, okay. Uncheck generate mid maps, that's fine. Filter mode point, so this just means that when you import it, it won't have any pixelation. And max size, because these were actually pretty low resolution, we can just set this to be 128. And format true color. Hit apply, and it will apply all these changes. And what we can do now is we can simply drag in our paddle object into this hierarchy. And so as you can see in our game view and our scene view, this object has appeared. So what you're going to do is use these arrows to manipulate the transform of this object. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, the actual Pong game is a lot more zoomed out than that. So you might, if you wanted to, make this smaller in size, but a better method of doing this is into the main camera, you have something called size. And if you click on size and drag it around, you'll notice that this lets you change the zoom in and the zoom out. So 15 looks good. And now, as you may have figured out, we need to move our paddle back a bit. And you can leave it in the center of the screen if you want to. And so imagine you've lost your paddle and you can't find it. A little tip is to double click on the paddle in the hierarchy and Unity will automatically navigate to it. So now here's another important thing in Unity is the inspector. So this lets you change the properties of an object, most importantly the transform properties. So for our game we want it to be nice neat numbers, so we're going to change this from -20 to 0.4 to just straight up -20. So that's good. And we want to import our ball now, so we'll repeat the process. We'll just drag it in, but for this one we're going to drag it under the paddle. So this will make it a child of the paddle, so that if we ever move the paddle, it will also move the ball. So the ball, we don't want it to be in the middle of the screen to begin with. We want it to start near your player. So put it about there. So its position should be about 2. Okay. And that's already looking pretty darn good. But what we're going to do is create the little line in the middle to indicate the halfway point. So a good trick for this is select your paddle, press Ctrl D to duplicate it. Now you can just delete the ball component and rename this to say halfway, okay? And move this into the center of the screen approximately. Doesn't have to be that perfect. And it's already looking way too big, so I'm going to change its scale on the axes. So for example, the x-axis I might want 0.5, and on the y-axis I might want 0.2. Yep, that looks actually perfect. So what I'm going to do now is quickly select this object, press Ctrl D, then move it up on the Y position up, for example, 2 units, select it, Control D, move it up 2 units, and I'm going to repeat this process till I reach the end of the screen. So I might speed this up just so you guys don't have to watch. So there you go, we've made the halfway line out of a whole lot of disjointed lines, and as you'll notice, it's in our hierarchy looking really messy. They've got numbering and it's already becoming hard to tell what's happening. So what we're going to do is go up to this game object, little option, and hit create empty. So this will create a completely blank game object with no properties except for a transform, and I'm going to name this level. And I'm going to make sure to change its position to 0 on each of the axes. So these halfway objects, you're going to select the bottom one and then shift and then select the top one, and this will select all of the ones in between. What you can do is just drag these onto the level. Because I don't like this numbering, I'll call it halfway and then just hit enter. So now all we have to do is click this little triangle next to level, and they're all hidden, but they're still there. So I'm personally thinking that this paddle object is a bit too thick. So if I was to, for example, change its scale on the x-axis to 0.5, you'd notice that the ball would also change its properties. So how we fix this is we drag out the ball and we change this one's properties. So I'm going to say 0.75 and 0.75. Okay, and now I can drag the ball back under it, and you'll see they've retained all their properties. So now that we've set up the level, we're not going to do the score right now because that's getting a bit complicated. We'll be focusing on that in the next tutorial. What we're going to do now is write some code. So I promise you it won't be very difficult, and all this code's going to do is make it so that when the player presses the up and down arrows, it moves this paddle object. So how we're going to do this is go into the project view and go back to your root folder, which should be named assets. Right click to create a folder like we did before, and this one we'll call scripts or code or whatever you want to do. And in this folder you'll create a C# script. So I'm going to call this paddle, or you can call it movement or whatever you want. All of this stuff is just optional right now because this is the naming of the objects. So once you've opened it, it'll open in a program called MonoDevelop, which basically just lets you edit the text. So it's all looking really scary and codey and hacker and fancy and all that, but don't worry, it's really easy to understand. So see these 2 little backslashes? So this means these are just little comments to the person writing the code that the computer doesn't read, so we can actually just delete them. So what we have now is a void start and a void update. So that means that everything that we write in this void start, when the game begins, anything that we write in there will happen. And then second of all, we have this void update. And whenever we write code in there, for example, code that says, I don't know, make the player's X position +1, it'll make this happen every single frame that the game's running. So if we said the player's X position +1, what would happen is it would fly off in the X direction. So it sounds a bit complicated, but it will make sense soon. So this void start we're not actually going to be using, but what we're going to be doing before the void update is defining variables. So if you remember back in maths class, you probably did use variables. So it shouldn't be too hard to understand what a variable is. But in order to define a variable, you have to tell the computer whether you want it to be seen in Unity or to be hidden in Unity. So you use that by public or private, which makes complete sense. And now you have probably the trickiest part, which is the variable type. So for example, if you type int, that would mean that the variable is an integer, which means that it will be a number with no decimal. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, -1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to define a variable that's of a type float, and so this just means a number that can be decimal. And so now you're going to name it, so I'll call it paddle speed. This can be whatever you want. And now you can set it or you don't have to. So to set it, you just use an equal sign and then you set what you want it to be. So I'm going to set it to be 1, okay? Pretty simple. Now to tell the computer, you're done with this line, go to the next line, you have to use a semicolon, which is on the right hand side of the L key on your keyboard. So again, we're going to write public to tell MonoDevelop that we want to show this in Unity. And this is very complicated, but what it is that this will be a type vector3, which basically means it's a position in 3D space on the X, Y, and Z axis. So yeah, I know this is complicated, but we gotta know it. So we're gonna call this player position, and we can just write semicolon because we don't need to define its value yet. So we're gonna avoid update, which means whatever we write here will be called every frame of the game. We're going to define another float, and this time we don't need it to be public, and if we wanted to we could write private, but by default if you don't write anything it automatically becomes private. So it's going to be a float, so that means it can have a decimal, and this will be called the Y position. So this is going to be tracking the Y position of the player. So this will equal, now hear me out here, game object. So this is really important. Game object, written like this with a lowercase g for game and a capital O for object, means that we're talking about this object here. We're talking about the object that this code will be applied to, which in this case is the paddle. So if we wrote game object with the lowercase g, anything that we write after that will affect the object that this code is applied to. So if you write dot, it will bring up all these different functions that you can change. We're going to be changing its transform properties, which means its rotation, its scale, and its position. So we want to change its position, so I write dot position, and we want to change it on the y-axis, so you write dot y. So this is setting this variable that we defined called ypos to be equal to the game object that this code's applied to, position on the y-axis, but we want this to be affected by when they press the up and down keys. So this is, trust me, the hardest part of this code that we're going to write. You're going to write plus, so just simple addition, and in these brackets, if you remember in maths, you'd probably use BODMAS. So these brackets, you're going to write input dot get axis. I'll explain this right after we write it, and now two more brackets and quotation marks, and then vertical. Okay, so that was pretty difficult, but what this does is it's when they get the input of up, down arrows, or preferably W or S arrows. So that's all it means, and what we want to do is multiply it by the paddle speed. So multiply is when you press shift and the 8 key, it should be a little asterisk. So this just means that it will go faster if we, for example, made this variable 5 rather than 1. So make a semicolon to tell the computer that we're done with that. Now all we're going to need is 2 more lines, and so this is going to be setting the player position variable that we defined up there. So I'm going to say player pos is equal to new vector 3, that means a new position in 3D space. And inside these brackets, we're going to have to, before we continue, go back to Unity and figure some stuff out. So for our paddle object, on the x-axis, we want it to be -20, right, the whole time. But we want it to, on the y-axis, go between, let's say, 11 and -11. So we're going to remember those numbers that we just figured out, and so it will go x, y, and z. So the x, if you remember, was -20, and now to say I want to go into the y, you hit comma, and because we want its y position to be anywhere in between 11 and -11, what we're going to do is use a function in Unity known as mathf, which means math functions dot clamp. So you're just going to have to remember the name of these, and this will set a variable and put it in between 2 values. So we're going to set the ypos variable to be in between 11 and -11. And now on the z-axis we only need it to be 0. So I know this is getting complicated, and if you have to, you can just copy it out, but if you do understand it, then that's great. So finally, all we need to do is set the game object that this script is applied to, position, to be equal to player pos. So you write game object with the lowercase g dot transform dot position to be equal to player pause. Now, that's pretty easy and self-explanatory. So now you hit File, Save, to save this code. So I'm already seeing a mistake here, but before I fix it, just to show you, I'm going to hit Save, open back up Unity, and what we'll do is when we play this, we'll see what a general bug looks like in Unity. So as we can see, that's not performing how we'd like it to. So I already know how to fix this, and it's very, very simple. And that is that clamp likes the negative value first and the positive value second. So if you hit save, minus Unity, wait for it to compile, press play, and you'll notice that our game is working perfectly. So as you can see, if we use our up and down arrow keys, or our W and S keys, this will move our player's paddle. If we were to, for example, change this paddle speed variable to 0.5, when we use this, it would move much, much slower. So thank you for watching, guys. Please tune in for part 2, where we'll be working on physics and making it bounce off the walls. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.